we are. So welcome everyone. This is your official welcome to inclusive and home-like spaces that scream, please touch, please explore. My name, for those of you that may not be familiar with me, is Lizette Lopez. It sounds so formal, right? So I like to go by Liz. Short and sweet, that's how I like it. I'm not one for titles, even though I am to most of you a professor. I just like to go by Liz. That's who I am first and foremost, first name basis. I am a professor at a community college, Los Angeles Harbor College, where I like to refer to myself as a facilitator of learning and a defender of play. At any point during this discussion, please feel free to chime in. If you have questions, do not wait until the end. Just interrupt me, blurt it out, unmute yourself, or type it in the chat. That's how I work. No need to wait until the very end, especially like me. Sometimes I forget things. I was like, what was that question that I was dying to ask? So at any point, please stop me. Any questions, comments before we get started? None? You ready to do this? Okay, this is the part where you jump up and down with excitement, like, yes, I've been waiting for this session. I'm so excited to bring to you this conversation because this is a discussion that is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm excited to provide you with all of the wonderful resources that I have to share. So let me put this slide presentation here for you. Don't mind me while I set this up. Are you able to see it? Just making sure that my technology is working because when it wants to, beautiful. There we go. And I'm still admitting people. Sorry about that, still multitasking. Pardon me, here we go. Let me just make sure that you're in the chat. So if you just came in, let me just briefly repeat everything just quickly. If you just joined us, we are recording this session. Please kindly put your first name and your last name on the chat. If you want to put one of the many hats you wear, I am not only a professor at a community college, I am also the mother of 3 very inquisitive boys. So as you can see, I wear many hats. If you want to include the many hats that you wear, perhaps you're a student, you're a teacher, you're a staff, you're faculty somewhere, definitely include your hat in there if you'd like. That way we know a little bit about you. Typically, we would spend some time introducing ourselves and talking, but unfortunately, we only have one hour. That's so unfortunate. We're going to crave a lot more, so just be mindful that we don't have a lot of time. Okay, here we are. Oops. Sorry, my computer is a little glitchy. Pardon me. Let me get it all started again. I apologize. There we go.
Liz, if you want me to help you with admitting.
Oh, thank you. That would be wonderful, Leah. Yes, let me make you the co-host. In the switching back and forth, my computer was a little laggy, so I'm going to allow Leah, since she so kindly asked, my co-host. Leah, you are an angel. Thank you so much. Here we go. All righty. Here we are. I'm sharing. Thank you, thank you, thank you for bearing with me. Present. Present. Here we go. Okay. Voila. We're back in business. Better, right? Can you see this? Beautiful. Okay, there we are. Okay, so let's kick off this discussion. Again, this is not a lecture, this is a discussion, which means that we are going to have back and forth dialogue. Pretty scary thing, right, during this pandemic. So throughout this presentation, you're going to see a lot of examples of inclusive environments that are going to dazzle your senses. They're going to spark curiosity and discovery, but most importantly, they are going to emphasize how you can build strong and respectful relationships. After all, I usually like to say, and my students will quote me over and over, that we as educators or facilitators or those who work with young children, or hopefully one day aspire to, are in the business of relationships. We want to establish and make connections. So as you are thinking about these wonderful spaces and relationships, I want you to ponder a little bit, okay? So let's take a few seconds to think about what you know or what you have been told about a learning environment. And by a learning environment, I think of, let's say, anywhere where children come together to learn. A classroom, a space where children congregate. So ponder a little bit for a bit. Think, what are some key words that would describe a typical learning environment? And if it helps, visualize it, okay? Visualize it, see it in your head. Think of what words you would use to describe what you see in this typical environment. And you can type your response in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just blurt it out. That's how I roll. But think about it. What would be one or two words that you would use to describe this typical learning environment, AKA classroom, AKA space? What are you thinking? Okay, and I'll go to the chat. Let's see, what are your thoughts? You can type it in the chat, you can blurt it out, engaging, hands-on, inclusive. Yes, I love these words, keep them coming. Visualize it if you have to. If you want to name a few things that are in your space, you can definitely do that. Welcoming, yes, keep them coming. What are some other things? You can even close your eyes, calming, yes. It's been really difficult to come back to school, even for younger adults, right? So we can only imagine how much more difficult it is for these little ones to transition back into the environment. Luna says colorful and bright. We're going to talk about that. Safe, keyword there. Fun, absolutely, and keep them coming. And as we're blurting out these keywords, manipulatives, yes, keep these in mind. We're going to unpack them in just a little bit after we take a visual field trip or a virtual field trip, visual too. This is again the part where you jump up and down with excitement. So we're ready to explore some classroom spaces. You coming with me? Yeah? Okay. So first up on our virtual field trip is, let me go back over here, classroom space number 1. So take a little bit to soak this space in, okay? If you want, enlarge this image so that you can get a closer glimpse into what you see here, all of the elements of this environment. But here's the part that is really going to require you to completely reframe your thinking. In a nutshell, here's the hard part. I would like for you to observe this space not from your own set of lenses as a grown adult, but from the lenses of a young child. So if it helps, visualize yourself as a younger self of you. After all, there's really huge differences between the adult you, right, and the younger you. For some, for many like myself, right, the distinction is like this small. But imagine yourself having a child or being a child, having a child, that's a whole other thing. And having to spend, let's say, 6 to 8 hours in this space. What do you think? How would you feel by being in this space for 6 to 8 hours? What are some things? You could blurt them out loud. You can type them in the chat. How would this environment make you feel? Stephanie says, I would feel small. That's a powerful statement, Steph. Thank you. What else? Enclosed. It's busy. Yeah, Leah says it's busy. Bored. No space to move around. Yeah, the lighting is most certainly intense, right? It's bright in here. Anything else we want to add about this space? Yeah. Okay, so now remember, keep this. We're going to unpack it in just a bit. Now let's move on to our second classroom space on this wonderful virtual field trip. We sure are saving a lot of gas, aren't we, by doing this virtually? So here is, oops, I'm getting ahead, getting excited. Classroom space number 2. So same approach here, folks. Think of how this classroom space would make you feel. And remember, you're still seeing this space through your lenses of a younger child. What will your younger self be feeling after spending lots of time in this environment? What are you thinking? I love the emoticons here, the emojis. Relaxed, inviting, exploring, super mellow, able to explore around. What a contrast, isn't it? Super cool. Yeah. So I know that you're itching to dissect these spaces, aren't you? Oh yeah. So here we go. Let's unpack these two spaces because there's a lot to be said. I know we just briefly summarized and shout out some answers, but let's begin to unpack it. And here first, I'm going to borrow from a legend in child development. And this is Lela Gandini. For those of you that may not be familiar with her, she was an educator that came to the US from Italy and began to basically influence the US on the Reggio Emilia philosophy and approach, which is something that we really embed at our college where we teach our child development and education courses. So Lela Gandini said that in order to act as an educator for the child, the environment has to be flexible. It must undergo frequent, that's the key word here, frequent modification by the children. And notice how it lists the children first and the teachers in order to remain up to date and responsive to their needs, to be protagonist in constructing their knowledge. Okay, here's a quick side note. For all of you bookworms, do we have any bookworms in the house? Okay, most of you are closet bookworms and you do not want to confess to that. But if there are any, what is a protagonist? Who is a protagonist? Blurt it out loud, type it in the chat. What's a protagonist? What do you think? And if you don't know, give me a guess. Show me. A character, you've got it. Oh, Luna, yes, Luna, so clever. The main person, the main character, basically whom the story revolves around. Now, in this particular situation, in our classrooms and in our learning environments, who are the protagonists? Yeah, children.
Children.
Indeed, you got it. The children are the protagonists. So what a mighty message this is. And there's a few key takeaways that I want you to take from this because we're going to use this to spring off on how we can really create an environment that is inclusive and home-like. Number one, children are the main characters, without a doubt. They are the protagonists. That's whom this environment should revolve around. Two, the environment has to be flexible. And by flexible, we mean not rigid, not stagnant, but malleable. That means that I can easily shape it, move it, transform it. Think of Play-Doh, right? When it's all malleable and you can shape it into whatever you want. And the third key takeaway is it has to undergo frequent modification. If you really and truly want to meet the child's needs, you have to be willing to adjust and adapt your environment. And none of this, this environment always looks like this. The dramatic play area is always like that. We always line up for lunch. We have to be willing to adapt and modify our environment. Questions so far? And remember, you can just blurt them out. No need to hold on to any of this. And mind you that for those of us that are working with young children or that we one day hope to, we have the privilege, and I use that word, the privilege to hopefully work and serve children during one of the most critical periods of their development, especially during the first 8 years of life. It is a privilege and an honor to do what we do. So please note that we shouldn't take this task lightly because it is such an honor. So let's use these mighty nuggets of information that we are going to discuss today to really reflect on how we can begin to create spaces that are inclusive and more home-like. We want them to feel more like home versus school. For many of us, our homes are our safe haven. They make us feel at ease. They make us feel protected and secure. I mean, really think about how you feel after a long day. Imagine the toughest day of your life where your feet are throbbing, where nothing went your way, where you are exhausted, and think of coming home after that long day and just going, that feeling. Yeah, you know which one. That's the feeling that we want to replicate. We want our environments to provide children with that feeling they build when we provide for them a sense of community and belonging. But to do that, we need to begin by evaluating and assessing our spaces. In short, we need to really just take apart and dissect our learning environment. What do you say? Are you ready to do this with me? Yeah. Show me some sign that you're alive and present on the other end. Yeah. Okay. So let's begin with that first classroom space. So here we go. Remember this space right over here? Oh yeah. How can we forget this bright, visually busy space? In fact, this environment draws your visual processing system in. And that's your sense of sight, as in your vision. The use of all of these high frequency colors, like your red, you see those blues, those primary colors and the yellows, they're everywhere. And somehow, here's going to be the hard part. And here's where I really want you to remember that phrase, to reframe your thinking. Somehow there's this belief by adults that these colors appeal to children and that they're actually pleasing to them. But did you know, and by the way, for disclosure, I am full of useless information, so this is one of them. Did you know that these colors can cause sensory sensitivities? It can cause one's blood pressure and heart rate to go up. In fact, clinical studies of children, and particularly those with autism, especially boys, suggest that they can often experience sensory overload, the taxing of your senses, with specifically the colors red and yellow. And that's because of their eye structure. So there are these rods and cone cells that experience changes in utero. That means when your mother was pregnant with you, due to chemical imbalances or neural deficits in the brain. And because of this, most of these children perceive these colors far more intensely than perhaps you and I. So these bright colors are even brighter for some children who have sensory sensitivities or autism. And here's the shocker. You ready for it? Ultimately, this can cause really serious physical effects. It can change a child's level of aggression, the length and the quality of their attention span. That means how long they're able to pay attention and stay still, and their ability to communicate effectively. All of that by just adding the red and the yellow to your space. I'll give you a few seconds to process all of that. It's a lot to take in, I know, right? It completely goes against everything that we've been taught in our field. And if you have to take a deep breath, right, soak this in. Now, do you want me to address the elephant in the room here? I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, okay, Liz, then why are all the classrooms like this? Why is the typical US classroom predominantly like what we see on the screen? Why is this so common? Where walls are covered with alphabet letters, which calendars as well, which by the way, I always say that any child who is under the age of 6 has no business with a calendar unless they are attending meetings. Oh, and job charts and commercially produced bulletin boards displays. And you know which ones? The ones that are right off the Lakeshore and Kaplan catalogs. We're not saying that Lakeshore and Kaplan are not appropriate things, right? We're just saying that oftentimes that's our primary source for obtaining the materials that we use in our classrooms. And notice how there's labels of almost everything on the shelf, on the materials, on the surface. There's also rules posted somewhere. And of course, those rules probably focus on what the child shouldn't do versus what the child should do. And unfortunately, our classrooms have become what a Harvard educator once called a culture of compliance. They're aiming more and more at regulations and population control, meaning wanting to get children to comply and trying to control them and to obey. not on dreams and hopes for children. So even if you just start to ponder a little bit about some of the common sayings you often hear in our classrooms. Friends, remember our rule not to build higher than our shoulder with the blocks? I know, that's pretty intense. Or we use our inside voice here. Listening ears, eyes on me. All of these phrases and oftentimes arrangements tell us that, here we go again, back to our quote, that we're not working with the idea of creating flexible environments that are responsive to the children and the teachers so that they can construct knowledge together. I'm sorry about that. My little guy's having a hard time. I have a little baby, so I do apologize for the background noise.
I don't know.
So
So this is real life.
Thank
So
you.
I know as a presenter, you're probably like horrified of a minute. Fortunately for all ECE people, that's a good thing, right? So everybody on here is going to be having great, because anyone who has either had a child or has worked with a child know that they cry not when we want them. Our time, so it's all good.
I was like, leave the house, leave. They did not leave.
Girl, go for a walk. It's all good. No, it's all good. It's all good.
Thank you, Renee. That really makes me feel so much better. So speaking of children, right, we want our environments, you know, in a sense to be reflective of all of these things. In fact, why don't we do that right now? Why don't we spend some time to reflect a little bit on our environments? Where do these ideas come from? Where do these ideas about how I arrange my space, you know, originated from? And why do I think that they are best for children? Have someone else's interpretations of standards or rating scales begun to limit my thinking? Am I allowing commercial, and by that I mean these Lakeshore catalogs and Kaplan or political interests to shape more and more of what I do? And you don't have to answer this out loud, but if somehow in there you did say, yeah, I guess a little bit is trying to creep in, then you're going to start to find yourself coming into a space that looks like this. A bright, visually noisy environment where perhaps there's no place to sit as an adult. And you know which classrooms though are, where they send the message, hey, get in and get out. Where you overload your visual system and your auditory, that's your sense of hearing, by the way. Where most materials are stored in cabinets and put away. They make it really challenging for a child to self-direct their play and access materials that are needed for their learning to unfold. A place that after sitting for a few minutes makes you want to say, I want to leave and get out of here, or scream or become fidgety. So think about this for a bit. What do these environments communicate about what we want children to experience in our time, in their time in our classroom? What does this environment teach those who are in it? And how is it shaping the identity of those who spend their days here? That's the big one, right? What are your thoughts on this so far? Any thoughts, comments on these spaces, on these questions? Have you any aha moments come out at you? No. All right. Okay, ponder. I know it's a lot to take in because all of this points to one very clear message, right? Let me point the obvious. The power in the environment, there's so much power in it. And this concept of the environment being a teacher is not a new concept. I wish that I could take credit for it, right? But it's not. This is a notion and a concept that has been around for a while, especially to know that this environment serves as the third teacher is at the heart of the Reggio Emilia philosophy and approach. They believe that first, the parent is the first teacher, then the teacher or the educator. And by the way, if you hear me say this, I often like to refer those who work with children in the classroom as facilitators or collaborators rather than teachers, unless it's someone from the outside of our profession or our field, because it's much easier just to say, I'm a teacher, right? If I say facilitator or collaborator, they'll look at me with deer in the headlights. Huh? What is that? So just make a note of that. First parent, teacher, educator, and the third, the environment. And that's the part that I will be helping you with. Oh, yes. So let's begin to unpack this because this is the part that you really want to get down to. Remember at the very beginning of our discussion that I said, ponder about some keywords that describe a typical learning environment. Let's come back to those words that you said. A few of you said lively, fun, bright, welcoming, belonging. Remember those? Now, would you say that the words that you selected or chose or thought of or reflected on represent the typical US classroom? The one that screams, pay attention, focus, eyes on me. Remember that? And that's often because, not because of the educators or facilitators, but often because of the aesthetics. That's how things look of the classroom. This space bombards your visual and auditory senses. This space can shape children's identity into being complacent, play it safe, little humans who often fear and mistrust adults, AKA teachers. And that's because they have little to no say or control over their play. And this adult and child relationship then becomes shaky. And I know that oftentimes it may seem like, Liz, you're painting such a dire context, right? But in my defense, I did forewarn you that this discussion was going to completely reframe your thinking, okay? So, is it space number one that your keywords aligned with? Or is it space number two? The one that feels far more cozy, inclusive, home-like, and that screams, please touch, please explore.
Liz, I'm cracking up right now because I can't handle personally as an educator anything hanging from the ceiling. So the second I saw it, I was like, oh, no, not on that one. But I think it's like knowing what works for you. Because I know like when I had my own classroom, I made a certain rule that I thought was healthy. And we had one wall that was blank in the room. And I always kept the ceiling blank as well. And a lot of educators, especially when I taught elementary, would constantly dangle from the ceiling. And perceptually, that was hard for me. And having like blank space in the room gave me a space to turn and have no stimulation. And so, like for me, I love this room if there was nothing on the ceiling. But I think it's just knowing what works for you and then also knowing what works for your students. You know, I think about one year, I had a student that had intense migraines. So I had to change the lighting in the room in order for his migraines to subside.
Yes, and that is key. The key word that I want to use and that I always use in the classroom is being intentional. And what I really want to, what I was going to get to in a little bit is that I want you to look past this as just it looking beautiful and pretty. There's intentionality behind everything. And I'm going to show you why that canopy is placed directly below the fluorescent lights. Because you are going to say, what? So aside from it looking like, oh, this looks gorgeous, there's a lot of intentionality behind how these items are selected, where they're placed, right? But that's a very valid point, Renee. For some children who do also have sensory sensitivities, anything that's hanging above can be totally overwhelming and taxing on your senses. So please note that we are going to get this, but this space really has a lot to offer. I mean, it definitely resembles a lot more of a home space. I mean, look at those curtains. That's exactly how I have them folded up and tied up in my home. And look at the rug over here. You see the rug? Yeah, that rug. You know you own one of those rugs. It definitely resembles something that someone may have in their homes. This could definitely be a place where children, families, and staff feel immediate benefits. A space where they may look forward to coming to every day. A space where they'll want to linger, investigate, and feel confident and competent. And guess what? Today's your lucky day, because I'm going to show you how to transform your space into something very similar, a place where you want children and adults to learn. You ready to embark on this exciting journey with me? Yeah, this is the part where you jump up and down with excitement. Okay, so let's start to unpack this part of our discussion, because this is really the part where we start breaking apart everything. I want you, as I forewarned you, to look at this as more than just decorating ideas. So when I was crafting this discussion, I really wanted to to think of, ooh, I don't want this to turn into like a catalog of, ooh, this looks pretty, this looks like nice. Go beyond the notions of just Martha Stewart, or what's the new ones nowadays, Studio McGee and Joanna Gaines. We want to be intentional. Again, intentionality. And we don't want to bypass the underlying concepts and principles behind these spaces that I'm going to represent. So just be mindful of that. Let's start transforming. So let's begin with the first one. We want to begin with your organization. And for teachers, this is hard, isn't it? I mean, it's so hard to use our classroom space, so that we are organized. Even our home, it's difficult. But for us to really make sense of our environment and for children, we need to begin to display and arrange our materials in a way so that it makes sense and it's so much easier for us to get work done. And by work, I mean the children get work done, right? The work of the child, play. And notice how the materials are arranged here. I know these are a little small, but I'm going to enlarge them a little bit so that you see other photos here. They're low to the ground. They're in open shelves where they're easily accessible. The items are organized in baskets, tin cans, and I don't know if you could see it, but right here on this picture, where the art materials are towards the right, do you see this little thing here? These are salt shakers. And guess what these salt shakers have in them? Not salt and pepper. It's glitter. Yeah, what a great use of materials, isn't it? Things aren't put away in cupboards or closets, although I do feel that it's necessary to have things that children should not have access to, but that's where those go, right? But everything else should be within a child's reach. And right over here, do you see to the left, the cheap drinking glasses right in this image? They're used to provide color storage for colored pencils and crayons. And I know what you're thinking. Liz, that's dangerous. That's a safety hazard. Don't be afraid to use glass. If you see children as competent and able, then you will allow them the opportunities to handle items that require care. If we don't, then how will children ever learn how to handle materials that are delicate? And look, I had the same reaction you did. When I first went to a Reggio-inspired environment and I saw glass, I mean, I nearly did, oh my goodness, I cannot believe it. Look at what they have there. And of course, me being the inquisitive person, AKA nosy that I am, I asked the director, how do you handle this? What happens when a child breaks something? And I still remember, the look of the director. She politely smiled and said, we talk to the children about it. We say this can break. So let's use both our hands to carry it. And if it does break, the children will step back and they'll yell, glass, and an adult will immediately come over and clean it up. But see the trust that the adults place on their little ones in an environment that is child-centered and inclusive. It's breathtaking, isn't it? What other things do you notice? And let me show you a few more other photos here. Look at this one.
Liz, I love that everything's accessible like this. The last time I was at a center, they had a very strong belief in keeping all of the children's spaces covered with fabric to not overstimulate them. And I've got to be honest, I kind of disagreed with it because I'm like, maybe 30 years ago that went along with kind of where the culture of that community was at, but that's not what it is, right? Like things are pretty fast paced right now. It's okay to have stuff and have like organized spaces that kids can have access to. So I really appreciate that there's full accessibility and that kids, I even see in their cubbies, they're going to grab their shirts and they're going to grab their, their caught out on their own. And the more kids can be like exactly what you're saying, confident, competent, and independent early on, that's going to go for life. So I love this. And you're also talking though to somebody who, when I had my twins, we didn't know what to do. And I'm very lucky that I was living in a house at that point with a good amount of space and I had a downstairs and upstairs. We turned our entire downstairs into baby proof. Like we took out the dining table. We took like anything that could really hurt them. It was just more like, this is a full space that you can climb. We put a plastic climbing structure in the middle of my living room because then it gave them, I didn't have a backyard, so and so you create it what you believe it to be. And I also, one plug that I put it in the chat, but I just want to share it. It's an old theory, but it's 100% relevant. Love and Logic. If you have not read about Love and Logic, that talks about just natural consequences with children, it's one of the best books you can read. They have Love and Logic. They've got Love and Logic for teachers, Love and Logic for early care providers, like just whatever your area of specialty is. And it just completely reframes your belief on how do I trust kids, and how do I create a trusting culture where if they're carrying a glass and it breaks, or if something spills, it's not the end of the world. We just like clean it up and deal with it like we do in regular life. And so thank you so much for this topic. This is the kind of control and autonomy that children are seeking as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that insight, Renee. Absolutely. And here's a few more. Look at this one. And I know initially from this vantage point, it might look a little busy, but notice that I like to say there's always a home for everything, right? With my little ones at home, I use this phrase in Spanish that says, todo en su casita, everything in their home, right? So find a home for your item. And then there is a home. The majority of the materials are either made of wicker, wood, tin, or natural materials that you would see in the environment. And this connects children to the elements of nature. It also creates a softer and warmer space. Like Renee said, sometimes children may be bombarded by all these materials, and probably that's because there's a lot of bright and flashy colors, right? And when we use elements that come from the earth and that are earth tone and neutral, they may not feel so, flashy. And it also sends the message that the materials are readily available for children to explore and touch. If a little one comes to you and says, teacher, I want to paint, in a classroom that is like most US classrooms where it's not child friendly and inclusive, a teacher's gonna have to go to a cupboard, pull out paint and paper. But in an environment that is inclusive, a child can say, I know where the paint and the paper is and my smock, and I'm gonna go and get it and put it on. I don't have to wait for an adult to get me these materials. Does your environment allow the child to easily access these materials without the help of an adult? And this is where you really want to utilize also your outdoor environment if you have one. I know that outdoor space is a luxury in most places, but if you can create that indoor and outdoor classroom, and notice how it's done here. Look at that. I know, all we need is a little glass of wine. You're right. I don't get that. And look at here. Amazing. And these are all from different, it's not just one program or one classroom. This is, a variety of photos that I've collected over the years. Look at here, right? The glass sliding door is there, so you can easily just open up the door and allow the children to easily move indoors to outdoors. Look at this. Rather than having plastic and commercial toys, filling up your space with loose parts that are open-ended and can be used a variety of ways. A pine cone can become an ingredient in a soup. It can also become a superhero or a plane or whatever it may be. And that is the beauty with loose parts. Bring in things from nature too. You can include a variety of textures. You can bring in water, sand, rocks, plants, pine cones, branches, name it. There's so much that you can add. And there's some really good elements here. Take a look at right here in the center. Do you know what this is? Ketchup bottles, condiment bottles. And they're being repurposed and used, filled up with paint. What a great way to use them. And notice also the tin cans, washed, sand down, and they're being used also as storage. Clever ideas, right? And what a great way of modeling how to reduce and reuse materials. This teaches our little ones to be mindful of caring for our planet too. This is a message that we definitely want to send. And ready for step number 2, or element number 2. Next, providing your space with elements of softness. And by softness, think of a cozy place for your eyes and your body to rest. You can include pillows, some cushions, items that children can cuddle with, so that you can create a space that feels cozy. And if you're up for it, you can even put a canopy up. And here are a few photos of inspiring canopies. You don't have to break the piggy bank with this. I know sometimes you may see this and say, yeah, I don't have, come on, the petty cash that we get, or we don't have enough for this. But this canopy is actually made out of an old set of sheer curtains and tree branches. That's it, just a couple of bucks. You can easily repurpose materials to create a calming space for children and families. This one is made out of an old bed sheet and some wooden dowels. Just a couple of bucks. Again, they've repurposed the materials so that they can soften the space. And another thing to consider is the furniture in your space. Are there adult-sized, comfortable furniture tucked in spaces here and there where the staff or family members can spend a cozy moment or some time with the child? Especially during those morning drop-offs, right? When you know that one child, or there's a few of them, we're like, oh, this is gonna be rough. When parents say bye. This can be a very challenging transition for little ones. But if you have a space where the parent can creep in, read a story, hug, cuddle, and then say, okay, sweetheart, I have to go now. That is a total game changer, particularly at the beginning of the school year, isn't it? Or does your environment send off what I like to call those dump and run vibes? Where, and by that I mean, leave your child here and get the heck out of here. Is there a space where a child can curl up alone and be reminded of those cozy moments with an adult or their parents? And these are often known as safe spaces, by the way, for little ones. These can definitely help with those mornings that are often rough and it's hard to let go. If you have a space like this, it can totally provide some intimacy and some calmness. And of course, use pillows or what they call poofs. And you could get them very cheap nowadays. Even IKEA has them for affordable prices where children can cuddle, or stuffed animals where they can use it as contact comfort. That soft teddy or plush can provide that feeling of, ooh, this feels good. Questions so far or comments? Now let's talk about those canopies, because they sure look dreamy, don't they? But they are strategically put, do you notice right here, underneath these fluorescent lights? Notice? And this is intentional. It not just looks pretty and aesthetically pleasing, excuse me. When you have fluorescent lights, if you really pay attention to them, some of them flicker. Have you noticed that? If you're in a position where you can look for a little bit at your fluorescent lights, go over there and take a look right now. You see, they can really flicker, or you can sometimes see them strobing. And for a child who has sensory sensitivities, like let's say autism or sensory processing disorder, also known as SPD, this can make it nearly impossible for them to play, read, learn, or even concentrate. And yes, these are commonly found in 99% of our classrooms. Isn't that insane? These fluorescent lights. And this is the shocker again. These fluorescent lights can also lead to headaches, a child not focusing, and ultimately it can burn down the child's resilience and their ability to function in your environment and space. So this canopy not only serves to make the space look a little bit aesthetically pleasing, but it also was strategically placed right underneath those fluorescent lights because it serves as a sound absorber, absorbs all that noise that those lights emit and all the flickering sounds that these fluorescent lights may have. So this is the purpose for having these canopies up here. Questions about any of this so far? Comments, aha moments? Okay. So just wanted to give you an idea of, I know that for some of you, these terms may be new or you've heard of them, but you may not know exactly what that is. When we talk about sensory sensitivities, think of a child or children who may have autism or sensory processing disorder. And this is a very complex disorder that originates in the brain. So in a nutshell, I think the best way to describe it is as the brain's inability to process, in a sense, take in, absorb, organize, and use sensory information. That's SPD. And the best way to empathize or to feel what children who have autism or SPD may feel is to imagine hearing a loud siren. Okay, like the yeah, you've heard those. So imagine hearing a really loud one. Most of you will tune it out you'll ignore it, right? And you'll typically respond with a, oh, that's loud. Or I wonder what happened. But a child with sensory sensitivities or SPD will respond to that as, oh, no, don't do this to me, please stop. And boom. A fight, meaning I'm either going to fight you or hit you. A flight, I'm going to get the heck out of here or hide underneath the table and withdraw. Or a freeze, I'm unable to move, breathe, or speak. Or fright, I'm terrified, this is scary, I don't know what to do. One of those responses or more are going to be triggered with certain things in your environment. Now, would you like to see how this plays out? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please show me. I really want to see this. Okay. So here's a little short clip on sensory overload. So bear with me. While I put it back up. Here we go. And please note if you can't hear the sound or if the video is a little glitchy, all you have to do is just turn off your video and that will speed up the video. Okay, so here's a simulation of sensory overload and what some children or adults may go through. Let me make sure the sound is on. Can you hear? I realized I was talking and I was muted. What are your thoughts? That was impactful, wasn't it? Did you notice the response that was triggered by that little one? Fight, right? And then withdrew, almost like, right? Flight and also fear in a sense. And that is an example of how a child may come in with certain sensory sensitivities and how elements of your environment can cause one of these fight or flight responses. So let me put back our slides. We're almost there. So bear with me while I get it back up here, if you don't mind. Here I am. Okay, here we go. And I provided you a little image of what the brain with a child with sensory processing disorder or sensory sensitivities may feel like, right? Noise, light, taste, touch, smells. Oh, this is painful, it hurts. And a brain without SPD so that you can get that visual. Here we go. So now let's move on to the next one. Now we focus on aesthetics, and that's basically how something looks and feels in your space. So you want to focus on not only having your environment look beautiful and the environment being an open invitation for curiosity and discovery, almost like this. And think about the items that you're bringing in to decorate, to use as toys, as props, or materials for the children to use. Are you bringing in items that reflect the cultures of the families you're serving? Or are you shopping right out of a Lakeshore or Kaplan catalog? And I tell you that after this discussion, you're going to be looking through, not through those Lakeshore and Kaplan catalogs, but through Craigslist, OfferUp, or what I often do, and I have no shame, okay, maybe just a little bit of shame, the side of the road and looking for things that are free and like, ooh, that looks really cool. That would go so awesome in my classroom. Definitely not shopping through commercial stores that have little to no diversity. And here are a few other images for you to soak in. Look at this table. Doesn't it remind you of a typical table you would find in a home with the tablecloth and the placemats and the briefcase right over here? And here's another element to add to your space. If you include fairy lights, the light fluorescent, not fluorescent, the LED lights. LED lights are also better for lights, 100 times better, and they're much better for the environment, by the way. But not the colorful ones, but the ones that look a little bit more whimsical in your certain areas or centers of your classroom. It definitely gives a space that feels a lot more whimsical and magical, that feel. And here's a few other examples of how this is being used. Right here in the dramatic play area, it's intertwined with branches. And if you notice right in here, this branch, this is the science area. So they've taken a branch and they've just added the twinkle lights around it. It really becomes a gorgeous focal point of wonder, doesn't it? And then you focus on the lighting. Now, let me tell you, lighting is everything. It creates a sense of calmness. It also has the power to transform. And all you have to do is just ask your YouTubers and your Instagram models, and they will attest to it. Lighting is everything. If you incorporate a variety of shades, tones, and intriguing shadows throughout your space, like look at right over here, or natural light. If you have windows, open up those windows, fold back and tie up those curtains so that you let that vitamin D in. And look at here. You could even create your own intriguing shadows. I'm going to show you how this is done. I know you're probably wondering, how do they do that? You see the welcome to room 11 here? You can use many sources of light. Like in this example here, they've used a lamp. This is a black light. So they've included a black light and have put throughout the classroom a space where you can crawl in and out with scarves and sheer curtains. Guess what is being used here to create this fabulous shadow and image? What do you think? What are your guesses? You can type it in the chat. What do you think? Here, I'll show you a few more. Can you see how this one's done too? This is displaying the child's artwork and projecting it onto the wall here. Or here. If you said a good old projector, you are right. And remember this one here? This ancient artifact? I know that some of you have traumatic experiences from your elementary or school age years where your classroom teacher used one of these overhead projectors and you put those, remember those see-through laminates and then began writing. We think of all those worksheets, but this is used in a very different way. You take one of these old projectors or even the light tables and you put in items that have an interesting pattern so that the projector can then reflect this interesting pattern throughout the classroom space. And that's what is being used here. Or, and here you get a closer look. Or you do something like this. Notice how the projector is right over here. There's a ton of, they have magnetiles, those magnetiles here. And they put them on the little screen of the projector, and then they've just sectioned off with the curtains here a space where the child can either place the items on the projector directly, or they can draw on there and just have their images, their art being displayed on the wall. Or you can use something like this. So this is, I don't know if you can see it right in here. So this is a mini projector. And you know those big projectors that you often hear? This is a little small one, so you can easily mount it and put it somewhere in your classroom. It has a USB port too, so you can put a USB and project images, so images of the children, their art, or you can just turn on the light and have the children place, you could say finger puppets or items, and it will display it on the wall as long as you have a nice clear white wall, like Renee mentioned, having that nice wall where it's just empty comes in handy for these. And these are fairly economical. I purchased this through a grant, and I think they were $60, $70, and they came with everything. So for a mini projector, it gives you a lot of bang for your buck, mini projectors. And if you're interested in these, let me know, and I could definitely send you a link for those. And then one of the most important ones is creating a sense of belonging. This is so important. Are we creating a place that reflects the lives of the people that live there? Forget the calendars, the bulletin boards, and the letters and the alphabets. Are you displaying the pictures and portraits of the families that are in your school? Are there photos of your children in the classroom? Or are they photos of just random children? You know, those stock images or those photos that you buy off a catalog? How do you display these photos in an attractive way? And here are a few examples here. This. Pretty amazing, isn't it? And look at here. All the documentation along with the photos. And these are in your slides. So if you want to go back and review them later, please do. Look at this one. Breathtaking. Here. And here, I want to point to, this is almost like a welcome area for the families. It's like a one-stop for the families. So as they're coming in and doing morning drop-offs, the families, there's adult-sized furniture here. There's photos of all the children under community right over here, and even a basket full of books. So if the child is having a challenging time transitioning, the parent or the family member can sit with the child and read just before saying and parting ways, right? It oozes with, welcome, we're glad you're here. And these are family chandeliers. In the Reggio Emilia inspired school, you'll often see these family chandeliers hung from a certain area. And some educators will even organize a night, like a family night, where all the families come in with their supplies, their materials, their loose parts, and together as a family, they create their own family chandelier. Isn't that pretty awesome? If you want to create your own family chandelier, I'm including the link on the instructions on how to create one. So you'll get that little neat treat with the slides and the presentation. And here's another idea for creating a sense of belonging. This is basically a school's idea of creating an art exhibit of all of the children's work. And then what they did is they created an art walk in their school. Isn't that pretty amazing and breathtaking? What a great way to build a strong sense of community, having an art walk in your own program. And lastly, flexibility, allowing for intimacy, for moments for the children to either be by themselves, alone, in their own space, right? Like in these areas here, or for exploration. Look at this exploration here, creating mud kitchens and places where they can get dirty or go and have an intimate space, solo, by myself, on my own, or time away from the group, as in here. They're using the floor as seating to play with clay. They've flipped over a table, wrapped it with saran wrap, and used it as a canvas for art. Or to work in small groups with a partner, like here. Allow children to position themselves in a variety of ways that don't always include sitting up. And don't get me started on the need for teachers and educators to sit up straight all the time. It messes with their vestibular system. And that's their sense of balance and their sense of self and space. In short, it makes children clumsy when we're always expecting them to sit upright. So you'll end up with children who are far more clumsier, out of sync, and so out of tune with their spatial awareness. Or you can use certain areas of your classroom to designate a space for smaller groups by just using cushions or pillows. See how it's done here? 4 little pillows here. And snip, snap, snout, this discussion is told out, everyone. Questions, comments? I jam-packed all that information and only went, what, 4 minutes after? Questions, comments, concerns, aha moments, ideas, jokes? Thank you so much, Gracia. Thank you, everyone. If you want to get a hold of me, if you want to ask questions, if you want to know more about inclusive spaces, or if I've inspired you in some way to come back to school or take child development classes or education courses, please seek me out. I'm Liz. There's my email. If you want to look for us on social media, we are also on social media. We will put our handle right over here. Or if you just want to ask a question about your environment and space, one of my little ones does have sensory processing disorder. So for me, as I mentioned, this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I'm always in tune with certain elements of the environment, especially in a setting that involves learning or a classroom space. Thank you everyone for joining me. I'm going to linger and hang around. So if any of you have questions and want to ask in a more intimate and private manner, I'll be around. The rest of you have a fabulous night. It was a pleasure meeting you. Actually, afternoon, it's still early.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, you're very welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye, Miss Liz.
Bye, Anna.
Thank you, Miss Liz. Bye-bye.
Oh, you're very welcome.